By now we've gone through the 5 different ways then showing that two triangles are congruent. So now in 4.6 we're going to go through, once we've shown that two triangles are congruent, so there's the different things we can list about them. So we know that congruent triangles have congruent corresponding parts, which means all angles and all sides are congruent to each other. So if we can prove that the two triangles are congruent to begin with, then we know that their corresponding parts must be congruent as well. So this is the one big reason that you're going to be using. So if we've already shown that two triangles are congruent, we can say, pick out any other corresponding piece and say that they are congruent because corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. And so the abbreviation we're going to use is CPCTC because that's just a little bit faster and easier to write. So we've gotten some more practice with two-column proofs. So remember however many given pieces that they give you here, so 1, 2, that we need to use our first two lines then and write those two statements. So AD is congruent to DC, and if you look at the picture, that's the one with the 2 marks on it. And then AB is congruent to BC, and that's the part that's already shown with our 2 congruent lines, and both of those are reasons will be given. So remember, you just copy exactly what it says in the given statements and put it down on those lines. Okay, so if you notice, we are going to need to show that the two triangles are congruent, otherwise we can't really line up any other angles that will be congruent. So step 4 is going to be mentioning something about the two triangles that need to be congruent, and then our last step can be that angle A is congruent to angle C. So right now we have two sides that are congruent. So either we need another angle or we need another side. And so if we look at your picture, one common thing, remember, that we're going to see is if they share a side there in the middle, then we can list out that that is congruent to each other. And if you remember, that is the reflexive property. So there's our other side. So now we can say that our two triangles are congruent by side, 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 since that's what we've got. We've got 3 sides that are congruent, so that's why we can say side, side, side. So if the first one I label as A, B, D, then I need to line up my corresponding pieces. So angle A is going to be congruent to angle C, and then A to B goes through the side with 2, so C to B also goes through the 2. So we're going to do C, B, D. So we've shown that the two triangles are congruent, so now I can pair up any corresponding piece, so my angle A congruent to angle C, and say that now that those are going to be congruent, and the whole reason why is because our corresponding parts of congruent triangles are going to be congruent, and we've already showed that the two triangles are congruent, so we can pair up any other side and say that they will be congruent as well. Here's just another proof, same general idea, but just different setup. So again, we have 2 pieces of information for our given, so we need to use those 2 in this first one. One thing I want to point out is, remember, anything that is given, we're going to list it out exactly as it is given in our problem. We don't want to change it or interpret anything when we write it out. So just literally those 2 pieces that they give us is the first 2 things we want to write. So next, we want to look for anything else in our picture that will show us that different pieces are congruent. And again, we have the side that they share in the middle. So KM is going to be congruent to KM. And because it's the exact same, there's a reflexive property again. Okay, so now we have a right triangle and we have one set of sides and another set of sides, and the way it's set up right now is we have angle side side, but remember we cannot use that as one of our reasons why our two triangles are congruent, but it is a right triangle, so we want to check to see, can you use HL as one of them? And if you look, we do have the hypotenuse and the piece in the middle is the leg. So yes, we can use HL to show that these two are congruent. So we're going to say our triangle KJM, remember the first one doesn't matter how you write it, the second one does though, and then KLM will be congruent by HL because we've got our, let's see, this is the leg piece of it, and this is the hypotenuse piece that we said are congruent in our right triangle. So now that we've said that both triangles are congruent, then we can list out any pieces that will also be congruent. So JM will be congruent to ML in those two triangles because our corresponding parts of congruent triangles will be congruent.